All right, story development students, final tutorial. What if you want to build a custom scene with the click move player? It has to have a special system built in to allow it to function properly on a terrain. So here's what we need to do to set this up. First of all, have a click move player positioned where you want them when you begin the level. And we'll notice that when I run this, everything kind of seems to be set up properly, but I can't click on anything. And there's some errors happening. So what do I need to do? Well, it's something called let's look into the click move player. I want to show you something in here on the player called a Nav Mesh, a navigation mesh. This player already has an agent for the movement. And notice you can actually change the speed and some of the other settings like acceleration and how you like avoid obstacles here, how far away it stands. You can adjust and play with if you're interested. Although be careful, don't play with too many things potentially, because you might break some stuff. But this is what controls the agent's behavior. But the world also needs to have some navigation management. It's called baked in. So how do I do this? Well, with the level. Now, side note, you have to do this every time you change the level. So if you make some adjustments, you're going to have to redo this step. It doesn't take long, but whenever you think your level's ready to be interacted with, you need to go to Window, AI, Navigation. When you do this, it's going to pop up a window on the right. The first thing we need to see here is something called agents. And we just need to make sure that these settings are the same as the agents in our scene. What I gave you presented here is already the same thing as our agent, because the player has a radius of 0.5 and, well, a height here of 1.23. So we're just going to make this height maybe 1. And let's go over here to our navigation, 0.5 and 1. So that's the height and the radius of our player. They should be the same numbers ideally. And we have a couple other things we can toggle here. The step height means how high something can be and have our player still step up it like a staircase. So the lower it is, the less the player can step up. Usually 0.5 is a nice level for this. And the max slope determines how steep something can be for your player still to go up. 60 degrees being probably quite steep, like a mountainside. Normally something like 45 or 33 is like a nice range somewhere in between there. Let's just make this like 33-ish and see how this goes. And the next thing that we need to do is head back into our inspector, and we need to tell the world which things are going to be navigatable. And we do this with this little toggle called static. The terrain should already be marked static. If it's not, make sure it's marked static. And what this does is tell the world what are the things that you're able to travel over and that actually get considered in the baking in of stuff. I'm going to turn the trees off of static for now so that, one second, I got to sneeze. Excuse me. Apparently I'm allergic to navigation meshes. So what I'm going to do is head back to our navigation mesh and click on this bake option. And what this is going to do is, again, we need to have the agent's height set to 1. And in here, so this is where we also need to make sure we have our settings set for the slope. Let's turn this down a little bit here. And the height for the step, let's make it 0.5. And all we have to do next is press bake. And what we should see then is a blue outline, which shows us all of the regions that are allowed for travel based on the settings that we've set in place here. So notice there's a little bit of some spaces here that aren't actually considered accessible for various reasons. It could have to do with the slope height. You can adjust this and bake it again. Now you'll see that maybe there's a little bit more that's accessible because it takes in mind some of the different slopes. If I make this really steep, it should actually make even more things accessible, although not everything's perfectly built in there. And the step height maybe has to do with some of this as well. If I crank this up, I can see that actually it's kind of removed some of the settings from this as well. So you can play around with some of these settings till you get the look of the space that you want your player to be able to move around in set up properly. I think that this is getting pretty close to what I want it to be for mine. Let's let that be baked. If you see something at the top of a tree, that's fine. Don't worry about that. You're not going to be able to reach that spot. We're not going to be worried about being perfect in our baking in right now. We just want it to be baked in well enough that we can actually interact with this world. Now that I bake that in, the game system should be able to actually now understand how to use this movement system. And some things you'll be able to climb up depending on the settings you put in. You should be able to even put in some slopes and steps and have them work well enough. And see here, I can kind of climb up on some of these sections. And it's smart enough to be able to kind of usually figure out pathing around or through things. Maybe some glitchiness. It's all right. We're making a prototype. We don't have to have everything perfect. Can I get to the top of this? Not quite. So maybe I want to lower that height if it's something, or I can actually kind of sort of force myself up there, but then I get stuck. So you can see how the pathway gets built when you bake those systems in place. And so now you have a way of actually getting this click and point system working in your game. And there's lots you can do to play around with it. So with all that said, you now get to make as many levels as you want, and the story being told whatever ways that you want, using either the first person or third person, or even you could swap between them. Notice that in my scenes, my scene 2 actually has the first person player selected. Maybe you have a scene that's like indoors, meaning that this third person perspective wouldn't work so well because you're going to have your camera clipping through walls. Well, maybe you want to switch to the first person perspective when you're inside and have the third person one for when you're out in kind of like the world map. So think of this as like a world map view and the first person as inside view. You also can have lots of different quests interacting in different ways. The one thing you need to be mindful of at the end here is that there so far isn't a system built in to carry items from one scene to the next. So if you pick up a watermelon in this level, you can't take it to another level. Maybe I'll build that in a future version, but for now, you can only have items work within the level that you're at. So sorry about that, but it's a limitation to what I've built so far. Other than that, I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of stories you can tell, what types of quests you can build, and the worlds that you can explore using these systems. Best of luck, and let me know how I can help.